Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is now in Malaysian cinemas. This is, of course, the follow up to the Planet of the Apes reboot trilogy, Rise, Dawn, and War. And let me tell you, both Bahir and I were very apprehensive about this one because that reboot trilogy is probably as close as you can get to a perfect trilogy of films. Incredibly unexpected, felt like a shameless cash grab, turned out to be amazing movies. In no small part due to Andy Serkis's motion capture performance and, of course, the grounded nature of those movies. Now, the original 1960s, 1970s Planet of the Apes went down a very sci-fi route. The first one was heavily influenced by the novel that it was based on, but then the following sequels kind of did their own thing. There was time travel, there were metaphors for race relations in America. All of that kind of played into this cyclical story as to how the Planet of the Apes came to be. The reboot trilogy, along with Kingdom, are a lot more grounded because they began with a global pandemic and, of course, this rise of Caesar as a military leader and the decline of man. Kingdom takes place generations after the end of War for the Planet of the Apes. And I think it's a very, very smart idea. It introduces us to a brand new character called Noah, a brand new villain called Proximus Caesar, and there is an interesting new direction in which this movie seems to be going, and one that makes perfect logical sense as to where you would take the story. At least that's how I felt watching this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think having heard director Wes Ball's interview with you, there's definitely places for this to go, right? Compared to a direct sequel, the sequel following an offspring or an offspring's cousin or whatever, right? I think moving it this far down almost clears the slate.
It does.
It clears the slate with regards to characters and baggage, but still acknowledges the rules of the game that you're playing.
Exactly. But I think one of the smartest things that they did was in the writing of the character of Noah, because I think fans of the reboot trilogy are massive fans of Caesar. Like, he was such a great character, and watching his evolution over those three movies was absolutely fantastic. And by the time you reach the end of War, where he is mortally wounded and finally dies, you're an emotional wreck.
Yeah.
And the easy way out would have been to use Cornelius, his son.
Yep.
Because then there is a direct connection to Caesar. And I think by completely separating that and by creating a character in Noah that is really interesting, as soon as you meet him on screen and he takes this risk to get this eagle egg, and you don't know why that's happening, and that's a pretty interesting story arc as well. But you learn so much about the character within those first few minutes of the movie.
Actually, I would say there's a bit just before that when Noah and his two friends,
Best friends,
ape colleagues, sort of get to an eagle's nest, and there's only three, and Noah sort of chides the other two and says, no, we always leave one behind. And then he says, why don't you two go ahead and grab it? I will wait for next summer. And I think that in itself, there's character there, right? Not only is he responsible, not only does he follow the rules, but he also understands sacrifice immediately in just that one piece of dialogue. And I think that sort of immediately attaches me to him, right? I immediately want to know more about this guy. I really immediately wanted to be on his side. And I think that was helpful.
He hasn't done anything heroic yet, but he's still a hero.
Yes, but also that's the definition of heroism, right? Because he's willing to do that for his colleagues. And I think immediately you're already on board. You don't need to see him stand up against a bear. You don't need to see him pull a baby out of a fire. You don't need to see him save the cat, because in that piece of dialogue, you know he will.
When you set a movie like this in a post-apocalyptic environment, the apocalypse has happened, the earth is in a state, I think it makes it a lot easier to actually do something that is underwritten. And what I enjoyed most about this movie is how underwritten it was.
Yeah.
The decisions that West Ball makes in where to use dialogue and where not to is so powerful. There is a sequence that happens twice in the movie at an observatory, and we won't give it away. But that sequence sets up so much of what is to come. And it is such a meaningful sequence. And it is completely silent and maybe uses light reflected on a person's face. And that's all you need to know. Like that moment tells you so much.
But it's also just the way the characters in that moment react, right? It's not just oh, look, it's a thing, but rather it's their faces reacting to it. I think even Noah says it in the movie, right? It's not just seeing something beautiful, it's a recognition of something else. And I
Yes.
feel like that was important. We still don't know what it is. There's a lot good here. There's a lot that's very, very good here. I won't say I have a problem, but I think at maybe just over the halfway mark of this film, just about to get into the third act, I think there was a bit of a stumble with the story. But overall, this was a very good fourth film.
What was the stumble for the story for you? Because I didn't have one.
I stumbled when May is trying to explain her reasons for being in this film. There was a point where May and Noah are having a conversation before they go into a place that they've been trying to get into. I don't know if I zoned out. I don't know if I sort of blinked and missed something, but I felt from that point on, I almost felt like I was playing catch up.
Oh, interesting. Because I thought all of that was very well set up in that by the time we get to that point where we realize what May is trying to do, what Nova is trying to do, I think it's very clear that there is a divide between apes and humans.
I wasn't sure why May was May. So not only is there a divide between the apes and the humans, but there's a divide between the humans. So I wasn't clear as to why that divide existed. You know, that some of them are having full conversations, whereas others are literally walking around in their underwear.
But that's because of the virus in War for Planet of the Apes. So not everyone got infected, right? So the people in the bunker were safe.
Yeah, I get that now, but I wonder if in story they could have been a little clearer.
I'm glad they didn't over-explain that. Like, I don't need that kind of recap. Like, I'm happy that, like, we saw the primitive humans
Yeah.
when they were being hunted by
Yes,
the
yes.
apes. And then we know that May is different. And of course, Raka knows that May is different as well. And he notices it even before she begins speaking. And for me, I thought that was important because that goes back to the theme of all 10 movies where speech is like the most important thing. Like in all of those movies, what you do is you hide your ability to speak. So Heston couldn't speak because his vocal box had been damaged in the crash. And then when he finally speaks, it's the biggest deal. And then when the apes travel back to 1970 San Francisco, they are told not to speak as well, because if you speak, the humans are going to freak out. Caesar is told to hide his ability to speak in Rise. And so, like, the whole idea of speech is such an important thing in the Planet of the Apes universe. I think it's like such a powerful metaphor and theme. So for me, the progression of the characters with May, with the introduction of William H. Macy as Trevathan, all of that kind of worked for me within the context of the story because I thought it did a really good job in setting up the conflict.
Question: is all of that only real for you because you've recently just seen all previous films? Because I haven't seen them in a long time and I don't remember. Like,
right.
I completely
think
forgot.
so, only because I feel like this movie stands alone by itself in that, yes, they mention Caesar a lot, but they mention Caesar almost like a mystical being from the past, as
Yeah.
opposed to a person who is directly influencing what is happening. Like, if this movie was about Cornelius, then I think you would have had to watch the last three movies.
Oh, no, I agree. I just feel like for me, it's just that human stalking thing took me literally until today when I was doing some research to figure out. So in the moment, I was left a little
Right.
confused, I think is the better word. Like, because I wasn't sure what was going on. in
Yeah,
that
because
sense. Yeah.
they don't mention the simian virus.
They don't, which I appreciate because we don't have to rehash all that. But I think the detail of there being intelligent humankind in this world, I would have liked to have known why that happened. Just as a refresher, as a line of dialogue for me and Noah. Because, yeah, I just felt like at that point, suddenly Trevanton and May are just having these full on conversations. And I was in the room, I was left a little gasping for air. That was the only thing. And it was very easy for me to just put that in my pocket and just sit down and keep enjoying the film.
I think what I enjoyed about this was that this movie addresses all of the themes of the reboot trilogy while setting up these new questions and conversations of its own. Like by the time you end this film, you can tell that it's not just rehashing the same problems that we had in
Yeah.
the first three movies. The first three movies were all about the folly of man, it was all about this new dominant species, the selfishness of humanity, whether they can actually survive with another species being dominant and intelligent. And then, of course, there is this Vietnam metaphor in the third movie with Woody Harrelson. And it was really about Caesar trying to find a home for his apes who were now intelligent, right? And they were
Yeah.
trying to carve out a space for themselves on this planet. This movie blows that wide open.
Yeah.
Because now you have the misinterpretation of Caesar's philosophies. You have elders lying to the next generation or omitting to the next generation what actually happened to this world, who owned this world, who developed it, why this world is the way it is. Like, there are all of these new angles. And then there is also May and humanity who are mounting a comeback. I don't know.
The thing I'm most interested with, which is a small thread in this one, is that misinterpretation or reinterpretation of Caesar's messaging, teachings, learnings. You know what I mean? Like, I think that is the most interesting thing here. I want to see more of the other ape clans. I think that was an interesting world building thing. But also, like you said, the potential comeback for man. I think, what does that mean for this planet?
But also, I really like it when you create a villain who, when he monologues, is actually quite convincing.
Oh, yeah.
Like when Proximus Caesar, when Kevin Durant is absolutely amazing as Proximus Caesar. We would have recently seen him in Abigail as well. He was one of the bad guys in that one. But as Proximus Caesar, when he is talking to Noah and explaining his point of view, it's very Magneto-ish. At one point, you're like, actually, this guy makes sense, lah. The world is in a shambles. Why not trust this fella? Sure, he's a bit of a dictator, but we've all been there.
No, but also for me, the big one, and this is always the lingering thought post any Planet of the Apes film, is who's in the right here? Because even at the end, when May accomplishes her mission, it's not victorious. It's ominous, really. You know what I mean? Like, so as a human, you're watching this and going, oh, I don't know if I want the humans to win. You know, like, maybe the apes are cool.
Like, on the one hand, the apes can just be a metaphor for good humans. And the humans in this are the metaphor for the capitalists and the evil, corrupt politicians and the selfish side of humanity. So it could actually be different sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
I prefer looking at it another way. I prefer looking at it as if there are two separate species. That makes for a far more interesting film. Because then I think we're actually questioning ourselves as humanity. Like, we're saying that, yes, there may be some remnants of good, but are we at the core of it selfish and self-indulgent and ignorant of nature and all of these things, right? So I think having the outsider perspective from the apes is actually really, really good.
Moving forward from here, it would be really interesting to see what the writers do, because there are all these story threads that you can pull on and end up in a different place. Like, I am interested to see a follow-up where we're just focusing on the humans, I'm also very interested still in a follow up where we just stay with the apes. That is what makes an interesting story. That any little bit of that story becomes relevant and interesting still with regards to what it can happen.
All of the performances are absolutely brilliant. I was anxious going into this because there was no Andy Serkis, but of course, Owen Teague is amazing as Noah. Kevin Durant is fantastic as Proximus Caesar. Like, all of them are really, really committed to these parts. And you know that when you forget that you are watching apes, when you're watching animals, and you're emotionally invested in these characters. I think that is just one of the highlights of the movie.
I mean, for me, I find it easier to empathize and feel sorry for and feel pain for the apes in this, because watching a bunch of humans get blown up in a building is just like, meh, that's just a Tuesday, right? But watch apes, their compound get burned down and just get dragged away with ropes around their necks. I was like, you bastards, let that monkey go.
Even though it was other apes doing it to them.
It's just this idea that these animals are being harmed and hurt. I don't care by who, and that sort of troubled me. Like, watching humans get thrown out of a burning building, I don't give a shit. It's fine.
Also, at $160 million, I thought the CGI was amazing. I thought the cinematography was fantastic. There are Jerry Goldsmith musical cues taken from the original. I think the pacing is really cool in this film because, unlike the original reboot trilogy, West Ball seems to go back to the 1960s and have that Western feel to it. Until today, I have to say, there are fewer images in cinema that are as cool as an ape riding a horse. I think that is still just fucking cool to look at. Like, there is a lot about this movie that had me completely immersed. I think that's the only word I can think of. It's a long movie. It's 2 hours and like 25 minutes, including credits. And yes, it can feel slow at times, but I think that slow burn is important because you find yourself just getting lost in the world. I think if you are a fan of Planet of the Apes, this is definitely for you. I think even if you've never seen a Planet of the Apes movie, this one might make you want to go back and watch those films.
The important word you use there is a slow burn, because a slow burn is different from a movie being slow, because a slow burn is paced. It's intentional. It's not there for no reason other than just extending runtime. There are bits in this film where I want to say it slows down to a crawl, but it takes its time. There are moments where this movie just almost pauses and you're there with Noah and May, or Noah and Raka, and just living in this world. And I feel like that was important to remind you that this is not the world that you know outside your window.
I feel like studios need to take note and watch the process of this. Because everything about this screams shameless cash grab. It screams, oh, look, we have this IP that we can exploit some more. But so much care and attention has gone into making not just this movie, but even the reboot trilogy, that it feels like something that studios can take lessons from. Because with Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, I think this franchise has become one of the most reliable in recent history.
It's also just constantly surprising, because we've spoken about this before, but when it was announced that a new Planet of the Apes reboot was coming in 2011, I remember thinking, just why? Why did we need this? And it came out, it was fine. Let's be honest, Rise of the Planet of the Apes was not the best movie in 2011, but it was fine. And I think the studio taking the time to pull together Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which came out 3 years later, and then War for Planet of the Apes, which came out 3 years after that, the not announcing it immediately that there will be a sequel allowed for the production people, specifically also Andy Serkis and Matt Reeves, to find a story that works and not just make a sequel for making a sequel's sake. And this one coming out 7 years after War for the Planet of the Apes, I think is really good. You can tell that it wasn't a studio driven thing. It wasn't that a studio says we need a fourth movie, go and write something. This feels like they found a story that finally worked logically for the universe and then went, we should try and do this. And that shows.
I think if the same people at 20th Century, if the same people who greenlit this also greenlit the new Alien movie that's coming out later this year, I will be very excited. If it's the same kind of thought process that has gone into, hey, we have these IPs, let's not just milk them for the sake of milking them, but let's find a good story and then tell it. If that is the thought process, then I'm going to be very, very happy when that new Alien movie comes out. But go watch Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, because it is just one of those rare fourth sequels that's actually really good and doesn't ruin the legacy of this perfect thing that came before it.
I don't know if we should call it a sequel.
It is very much a sequel, though, because you didn't watch the last 3 movies recently. There was that moment when you were like, even though this movie stands alone, and I think it stands alone well, you should watch those first 3 movies. You don't have to watch the 1960s films. Watching the 1960s films is purely for the Easter eggs. And there are a lot of Easter eggs in this movie, mind you. When Raka mentions the lawgiver, I'm just like, yes, lawgiver. And then there are musical cues from the original films and all of that stuff. Like, that's all for the super fans. But you have no excuse anymore. It's so easy to find those movies on any number of subscription services that you already have.
Yeah.
So I don't think that 6-hour commitment is too much to ask, especially when it's good. I think when it's rubbish, no one's asking you to watch The Phantom Menace again. Rise, Dawn, and War are just really good pieces of cinema. So I think you should love, but you can go and watch this without. I think after watching this, I believe you will feel inspired to watch those movies.
Yeah, I also feel like it's worth noting really quickly that this isn't sci-fi.
Oh, it's really not.
You know what I mean? Like, I know of people who didn't watch the originals because they thought it was sci-fi and monkeys running around. I'm like, no, it's not. It's really just high drama cinema.
Also, so many animal lovers in Malaysia. Let me tell you, if you are an animal lover, this thing is going to affect you in ways you did not expect. Despite there being CGI monkeys, I swear to God, you are going to be very emotional.
I learned that a long time ago with I think maybe Rise. Rise really ruined me.
Oh, even when his mother gets killed, when
You
Bright
shut
Eyes
your
gets
mouth.
killed. Oh my God.
You shut your mouth.
All right. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is now showing in Malaysian cinemas. Go check it out. Go watch it in IMAX. It looks amazing in IMAX. Let us know what you think once you've seen it. You know all of our social media feeds, Goggler MY. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.